Module 3.3, figuring out what you want from your golden prospect. This is probably, I don't want to say the most important module or video in this entire course because I've said that a few times already. There's a lot of important elements to this course, but this is probably one of the most crucial elements to my style of link building. And it's crucial to networkers too. Basically, my style of earning links is, okay, if we have to work hard to earn brownie points with prospects before they're willing to link to us, it might as well be a link prospect that has something to give us. And if all things being equal, I'd rather have a prospect that's golden as opposed to one that's bronze or copper. I want gold. And golden prospects are the prospects who can help your business the most if and when they link to you. So one of the more crucial elements of my style of earning links is obviously it's relationship building, and you're going to have to do a lot of work to build those relationships. But not all golden prospects are created equal. Some may have a lot of traffic. Some may have a lot of opportunities for your business, but you can't find an inroads into doing business with them. And that's what we're going to do now. We need to figure out exactly what we want to get out of each one of our prospects. And I know that this whole chapter, and this whole module rather, is about helping your golden prospects. But before you start helping them, you need to figure out what it is you want from them. Is it going to be a link on their directory? Is it going to be an endorsement? Is it going to be a homepage link? Is it going to be a mention on their podcast, then a link over from their podcast page? Is it going to be a full throttle endorsement on their newsletter? Whatever it is that you're going after, now's the time to figure out what those asks are. You need to come up with two asks. One is your first ask. When the prospect finally says, what can I do for you? You need to have an ask. And then you need to have a long-term ask. This is one that if a genie were to appear before you now and said, you can get anything from these prospects that you want as far as links go, what do you want? Is it an endorsement? And most of the times that's what you should be going after. But first, let's talk about the first ask. If you can't even find one ask, then there's no sense in helping that prospect. Not that helping people for the sake of helping people is a bad thing, but that's not what we're talking about in this course. We're talking about getting links. So what I recommend you do is do what I'm doing now. Pull up your golden prospects, and this is one of my golden prospects. I'm reaching out to them on behalf of a client. I won't tell you what client, but I've been pursuing them for the last last 6 weeks. And I know one day I will earn a link from them, and that will be soon. So, now, but what is that link going to look like? That's what we need to figure out. All right, there's a couple of things that I would love to get. One is a mention on the newsletter. Let me see this right here. Oh, let me move it over. They have a newsletter. I love newsletters. Those are stealth links. Those are links that will never show up on your competitors' link reports, or your competition will never find them unless they're actually subscribed to this newsletter. So that's one of my asks. I know if they have a newsletter, I want to be mentioned on it. Is that my first ask, or my second, or my third? I don't know. Right now, I know it's one of my asks. I think if I know, I'm going to have to find another category, because otherwise it's going to give away my client's industry or what they sell. So I'm going to have to pick something that it's not. Let's say I'm a marriage counselor. I would love to get that would be a horrible example, but let's say it is. Let's say my client's a marriage counselor, and I'm trying to get a mention of my marriage counselor onto their podcast. Well, I got ahead of myself, but I'm trying to get a link to their site from this site. So one of the first things I would do is I would go and I would check out the category that's applicable. I would have to look at their content first, because if I'm going to get a link, I got to know where to get that link. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. Now, here we go. Since my client is we'll say a marriage counselor, I need to find a post that has something to do with where it would be helpful to have the advice of a marriage counselor. How to get your kids to love nature. And there's quick ways we can do this too. All right. Here I cheat again. I'm going to go site, art of manliness. Then I'm going to look up, remember, marriage counselor. I'll look up divorce. No, I'll look up marital tips. So then again, what that search is doing is searching all across the artofmanliness.com for any post that has anything to do or any mention of the phrase marital tips. So here's marriage tips for men. Being a good husband, how to save a marriage. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, I want a link from one of these pages. What page do I want the link from? Well, the most recent. And I think you could sort that by most recent too, but I'm not going to. So let's just say this is the one. Where is it? I saw one right here. Let's say this is the one. Okay, I find this. I go through. I look at the post. I'm like, you know what? Enter the we. Maybe I can add a bullet point to how to execute a marriage meeting. Maybe I could figure out, okay, meet weekly, meet as just the two of you, and it's giving really good advice. But maybe I can add a couple more bullet points, or just one bullet point, and then have that bullet point be a quote from my marriage counselor client, and then have that when it mentions the marriage counselor client, so this is, or as marriage counselor John Quincy Adams, or John Q. Public, or Jane Doe, she says that, couples should do this. And then, of course, it'd be a link over to my client's site. But you have to find the pages that you want the links on. Otherwise, you're not really going to know what it is that you're going after. And you should always have a firm idea of what you're going after. Otherwise, you won't know how much effort that's worth putting into the chase. How much are you willing to invest into the practice of winning these people over? What are you going to have to do really determines on what you're going to get. You don't want to trade $1 to get a penny. So that's what I recommend you do at first, is that find out what it is you want from these prospects. Now, another thing that I noticed on this site, I already mentioned the newsletter. I definitely want my clients' marriage counseling business mentioned in the newsletter. And since this person has been my golden prospect for a while, I have subscribed to this newsletter from day one, as soon as this person became my golden prospect. So I have a really good idea what their newsletters are about. I've been studying them, and I know it, and I want to get my client listed in there. But I'm a link builder. Why do I care about getting my client listed in a newsletter? Well, I'm not a link builder. I'm a revenue builder. And if you have an agency, you should quit being an SEO agency and start being a revenue agency. Don't just worry about links. Just worry about finding money for your client. And if you can get them mentioned in a newsletter, that's just going to be gold for them. And they'll say, well, what about a link? Well, that's one of your asks, is asking for a link. So what happens is if you can deliver a mention in their newsletter, it could result in a lot of sales for them. It might not, but it might. And if anything that comes in is something that they wouldn't have had unless you had made the effort to make that happen. And they will recognize that. So I want to get my client mentioned as a visitor on. I would love to have my client interviewed on their podcast. I would love it. And that's what I'm going to work very hard to get. So my third ask for this particular client is to have my client as a guest on their podcast, because what will happen is you'll see that the podcast has notes. So not only does all the listeners hear it and everybody downloading it gets to hear my client speak, but also my client will get a link like this person did. So it looks like guests are getting links, and anytime there's something mentioned on the podcast, it gets a link. So if I train my client properly, I can have my client reference their site and have it be a big part, or at least a chunk of what they're talking about, without being commercial about it and bringing up their site for whatever particular reason. So my 3 asks for this site is the link on the one page, the newsletter, and the podcast. What am I going to lead with? The link. It's the easiest. And that's what I recommend you do as well, too. Lead with the link. This is the link building course after all. People, I've had questions. Why are you teaching us about newsletters? That's not going to help SEO. Well, you're right. It's going to help build revenue, though. But this is a link building course. Your first ask should be a link. It'll be easy. And if you ask for the link in a way where you're adding content to the page, where maybe you want to add something that you think would really help that post, and add a bullet point or write a bullet point and then put your name in it to get the link. That's and then send that to your golden prospect. That's going to be a great way to get a link in that way. But we won't talk about that quite yet. For now, I want you to just get used to going through all your golden prospects and finding out what your ask is going to be. Let me go to another one. Same client, same golden prospect list. Now this one I spent a little time on the other day, and I'm having a hard time finding any place where I could get a link. And even when I went to the blog, and I can't do the search I want. Let's say again it's marital counseling. A tie is not going to have anything on marital counseling. I can't give you the niche that my client's in. It'll give it away. But I'll say this, that for my client, in my client's case, this was not a good selection. His end users are at this site, yes. His customers would probably love this site. They probably are visitors of this site. They probably know about it. But going through this entire website, the only thing I could find as an ask, if a genie appeared and says, "What would you like from tie.net?" and is to get mentioned in their newsletter. But my client doesn't offer style tips. My client, I can't tell you, but it's not style tips. It sells something different to end users who care about learning to tie their tie and getting style tips. So that's, sometimes you have to take a pass on a client, on a prospect rather, because you don't have any inroads with them. There's nothing for you to ask from. They're not just going to link from their dress code guide to a marital counseling page. So there's no way to work something into that where you can get your site. Now that won't always be the case, and that shouldn't what you should always look for angles, because usually you can find one if you spend more than 15 minutes on it, especially if you get nothing but failure and you have no ideas the first 15 minutes. Those are usually some of the best ideas I come up with if I stick with it long enough. Around 30 minutes into it, you'll get an idea that just is awesome. But I spent time on this site, and I really couldn't find any way to get a link for my client or get mentioned or anything that would be beneficial to my client. So unfortunately, even though we did all the research on this particular prospect, I'm going to add them to my database in case I get a client that is in this style. That way I can then start building a relationship with them. But until then, there's nothing I can do for them. So I'm going to go to another golden prospect. This is the art of charm. I have been pursuing the art of charm as a golden prospect. Its owner's name, or one of the owners, is Jordan Harbinger. They have a podcast series that gets like 4.1 million downloads a month. And it's all about, helping men become more charming. It's not just for men either. But I would love, my client has already been a guest on this show, on the Art of Charm podcast. I would love to get my client in a second time. And so I'm working to do that. And I'll show you something that something I got cooking in the laboratory for them. And I think it's going to earn a link and get another guest spot on for my client. So my ask for this particular client, I already knew going in was going to get back onto the podcast, because everybody that gets onto the podcast, and let me find one. Like, everybody that's on the podcast, like The Art of Manliness, ends up getting a link over to their site. Let me verify that. All right, let's look for his links. There's one. There's a link to his product. Yeah. So, yeah, he's getting their guests get links. So instead of asking Art of Charm for a link, I'm just going to do my best to get my client booked onto their podcast again. So that's my ask. Is it my first ask? No, it wasn't my first ask. My first ask with this particular prospect was I asked him if he'd let me interview him, and he did. And I was very thankful for that. And this is not the guy. This is somebody different. Jordan Harbinger is definitely not that guy. But that's my ask for this particular prospect, is to get on the podcast again, because it'll work into a link too. And if your golden prospects do that too, well, don't even worry about coming to be talk to them about a link. Talk to them about becoming a guest on their show, on their podcast, and that'll get you the link. But go through all your golden prospects, look for your particular asks, and don't be afraid to shoot for the moon with some of your asks, but have some simpler asks too. Maybe there's a post already that you would love to maybe write a bullet point for them and then get a link that way. Or maybe they've already, whatever it is, the criteria that you use, just make sure it's relevant and you have something to add to the piece of content. And if you do that and send the content to them along with your link in it, say, hey, you can use this content whether you put my link in or not. I just thought it'd be helpful to you. Thanks. And send them a link request like that, and I'll show you what that looks like in a later video. But for now, I want you to just get used to going through your prospects and figuring out what it is you want from them specifically, because that's going to help you as you reach out to them and start doing and helping them, because you need to figure this out ahead of time before you spend a lot of time on a prospect that's not going to be able to help you back. So that would be a waste of revenue and your time, and you don't want to do that. So go through your golden prospects and figure out what it is that, not only what do they need, but what is it they can offer you. Then write that down for each prospect and try to have 1, 2, or 3 asks for each prospect. One is going to be your first ask. Another one's going to be a revenue generator. It could be added into a newsletter or a podcast. And number 3 is going to be an endorsement. And you're not going to be able to jump. You're not going to be able to jump across the entire stream, but you can jump across those stepping stones to get across the stream. First, earn a link. Second, get in their newsletter or their podcast. Then you earn the endorsement that way. And you'll find that's a pretty safe bet to take because it works. So that's what I recommend you do now is check out your golden prospects and find out what it is that you want to get from each one of them. And if you can't find what you want to get from them and you can't be specific about it, drop them. Go on to the next golden prospect. All right, see you next video.